We're going to look at the structure most novels are quietly built on, why it works, what the different versions of it are, and how you can use it to keep your draft from drifting into the ditch. By the end of our time here today, you'll be able to map any novel to a 6-beat arc, including your own. You know exactly which beat in your manuscript is weakest because that's the one that's going to tell you what to write next. And you'll have a vocabulary you can use to talk about your own work that you didn't have when you walked in. So let's get to work. Before we get into any of the specifics, I want to clear up a fight that gets in the way of every conversation about structure. Because if we don't clear it up now, half of you are going to be tuning me out for the next 40 minutes. There are two tribes among new novelists. Tribe 1 calls themselves pantsers. They write to the seat of their pants. They don't outline. They sit down and discover the story as they go. They'll tell you that outlining kills the magic. They'll tell you their best writing happens when they don't know what's coming next. They'll tell you about famous writers who supposedly never outline. Tribe 2 calls themselves plotters. They outline before they draft. They know where they're going. They build the skeleton, then they hang the body on it. They'll tell you that pantsers write garbage and call it discovery. They'll tell you about all the brilliant outlining writers who plan every beat before they ever type a word. The two tribes argue. They argue online. They argue in writers' groups. They argue at conferences. And both of them are wrong about the same thing. Here's the truth. Every novel that works has structure. The only question is whether the writer built the structure on purpose before writing or discovered it during revision. The structure is the same either way. If a pantzer's draft works, it works because the structure showed up. They wrote something good without knowing why, and when they look back at their draft, they can see the beats appearing where they should appear. The structure was always there. They just discovered it instead of designing it. If a pantzer's draft doesn't work, it doesn't work because the structure didn't show up. They wrote scenes they loved, but the scenes don't add up to a story. Now they have to go find the structure in revision. They have to do, in a much harder way, the work the plotter does up front. So the fight is fake. The work is the same. The only question is where in the process you do it. Here's the other thing the fight gets wrong. Some new writers hear the word structure and feel a door close, like the rules are about to crush whatever made the story theirs, like structure is a cage. It isn't. Structure is permission. It's the railing on the bridge that lets you walk out further than you could without it. Once you know the shape, you can do almost anything inside it. You can break the rules on purpose. You can bend the percentages. You can skip a beat for effect. You can write a literary novel with a 20-page resolution if your story needs it. You can write a thriller with a 100-page Act 1 if you know exactly why. But you can't do any of those things well unless you know where the bones are. The writer who breaks structure beautifully knows where they're breaking it. The writer who breaks structure by accident is the writer whose draft sags and dies. So today, no matter where you sit on the pantser-plotter spectrum, here's the thing I want you to hear. Almost every workable novel is built on the same bones. 5-act drama, 3-act movies, romance, thriller, literary fiction, fantasy epics, middle grade, different lengths, different genres, different tones, same skeleton. Different writers find the skeleton in different ways. Some find it in the outline. Some find it in the second draft. Some find it in the editor's notes. But the skeleton is the same regardless. And here's the part that should give you hope. You don't need to be a genius to learn the skeleton. You don't need an MFA. You don't need 10 years of writing experience. The skeleton is teachable. It's diagnosable. It's repeatable. Once you have it for every book you'll ever write. So let's look at the skeleton. In 1863, a German playwright and critic named Gustav Freytag named a book called Die Technik des Dramas, the technique of drama. In it, he laid out the shape he saw underneath every working 5-act play going back to the Greeks. He drew a pyramid, 5 parts. Now, before I walk you through the 5 parts, I want to say something about why Freytag matters. Because Freytag is taught in most high school literature classes, and most of you probably remember the pyramid drawing on a chalkboard somewhere, and most of you have probably been told that Freytag is dated, that nobody uses Freytag's pyramid anymore, that the modern world has moved past it. It's only half true. What's true is that Freytag's pyramid, taken literally, doesn't quite fit novels. We're going to talk about why in a few minutes. What's not true is that Freytag is irrelevant. The 5 parts he identified are still the structural bones of every working story. Modern story structure is Freytag with more beats. The pyramid is the foundation everything else is built on. So let's actually look at the pyramid the way Freytag drew it. Part 1, exposition, the setup. We meet the world, we meet the people, we learn what normal looks like for them, and we get the first hint that normal is about to break. In a play, exposition is fast. The first 10 minutes. We see the king on his throne. We see the loyal subject. We feel the shape of the kingdom. Something is being established and something is about to disturb it. In Shakespeare, exposition often happens in a single conversation. 2 guards on a battlement talking about the ghosts they've been seeing. That's all of Hamlet's exposition. We learn the kingdom, the king's death, the suspicion, the supernatural element in about 15 lines. In a novel, exposition isn't a chapter of backstory. It's the first scene or 2 of your book when you show us the character in their ordinary life right before everything changes. Last workshop, we talked about how to start a story, the 5 jobs of an opening. All of that is Freytag's exposition. Part 2, rising action. Things start happening. The character is pulled into a situation. They make choices. The situation gets harder. New problems appear. The stakes go up. This is the bulk of your book, the longest section. It's where most novels die because writers don't know how to keep rising. They write scenes that happen but don't rise. They write events that are not connected. They lose the upward pressure that rising action requires. We're going to talk about how to fix that in a little while. For now, just know that rising action is not just stuff happens in the middle. Rising action is pressure increasing, page by page. Every chapter has to be tighter than the chapter before it. Every choice has to cost more than the choice before it. Every obstacle has to be bigger than the obstacle before it. If your middle feels flat, that's almost always why. The scenes are happening, but the pressure isn't rising. Part 3, the climax, the top of the pyramid. The single moment in your story where everything turns. The character makes the choice they've been avoiding. The truth comes out. The villain and the hero meet. The bomb goes off, or doesn't. Everything in the book has been building toward this moment. Everything after the moment is shaped by it. Notice this at the top of the pyramid, not the end. The climax isn't your ending. It's the peak of action. There's still work to do after. A lot of new writers conflate climax and ending. They write a big climactic scene and then write the words, "the end." The reader feels cheated. The climax is the moment of greatest pressure. The ending is the world after the pressure releases. They're different beats, and they both have to be there. Part 4, falling action, the consequences. The world is settling into its new shape after the climax. Subplots resolved. The dust settles. The reader exhales. This section is shorter than rising action, but it's not skippable. New writers tend to either skip it entirely, ending the book at the climax, or stretch it out to 100 pages because they don't want to let go of their book. Both mistakes have the same root. The writer hasn't decided how much falling action the story actually needs. The general rule is the bigger the climax, the more falling action the reader needs to land. A war epic might need 50 pages of falling action. A tight thriller may need 3. Here's a test. If your falling action is 1 chapter, ask yourself if your climax earned a longer landing. If your falling action is 5 chapters, ask yourself if you're afraid to let the book end. Part 5, resolution, the new normal. We see the character in their changed life. The reader closes the book with a sense of where these people are going next, even if we never see them again. The resolution is the answer to the exposition. We met the character in their ordinary life on page 1. We see them in their new ordinary life on the last page. What's changed between those 2 ordinary lives is the whole point of the book. Some of the most memorable last lines in literature are pure resolution. They show us the character standing in the new normal, looking forward, alive in a way they were not on page 1. That's Freytag. 5 parts, useful, but incomplete for novels. Here's why. Freytag was writing about plays. Plays are short. Plays have 1 location, a small cast, 2 hours of stage time. A novel has 400 pages and 20 characters and 17 plot lines. Freytag's pyramid tells you the shape of the whole, but it doesn't give you enough beats to navigate the middle. If you're standing in the middle of a 400-page novel, the instruction, "You're in rising action," is not enough. You need to know where in the rising action. You need to know what beat you're approaching. You need finer resolution. So modern novelists use a more detailed version of Freytag. We took his pyramid, looked at where novels actually pivot, and broke the long middle sections into more pieces. We call it the 6-beat story arc. Here's the modernized version. 6 beats. Every working novel hits all 6. They might be in different proportions, different orders sometimes, with different weights, but all 6 show up. I want to take these slowly because this is the framework I want you to walk out of this workshop able to use. Beat 1, the hook. Chapter 1, status quo plus a crack. We meet the character in their ordinary world and we get the first sign that something is wrong or about to be. We talked about this last workshop in detail. Every opening has to do 5 jobs: anchor, character, question, voice, promise. The hook isn't just a great opening line. The hook is the whole first chapter or 2 doing the work of setting up the world and introducing the wrong note that's going to grow into the rest of the book. A thriller's hook might be a normal Tuesday with a strange phone call at the end. A romance's hook might be 2 people in their separate lives, with one of them just having a bad enough day that they're ready for change. A literary novel's hook might be a single conversation across a kitchen table that ends with someone telling a small lie. The hook ends when the reader can feel the crack, when they know normal isn't going to hold. Beat 2, the inciting incident. The door opens. Something happens to the protagonist that they can't walk back from. They get the job. They meet the stranger. They find the body. They get the diagnosis. They cross the river. The inciting incident is not just an event. It's the event that forces the character to choose. They could try to ignore it, but they won't. The story is now in motion. This is the beat that turns a backstory into a plot. Before the inciting incident, you have a person with a life. After the inciting incident, you have a person with a problem they have to solve. This beat usually lands somewhere between 10 and 15% into the book. If it's too early, the reader isn't invested in the character yet, and they don't feel the weight of what just happened. Too late, and they've already put the book down. Common mistake. New writers try to make the inciting incident huge. Explosions, deaths, dramatic confrontations. It doesn't have to be huge. It has to be specific, and it has to demand a response. Sometimes the inciting incident is the smallest possible thing. A letter arrives, a door opens, a name gets mentioned. The size of the event doesn't matter. The size of the response does. Beat 3, rising action, the longest section. The character pursues their goal. The obstacles multiply. The stakes climb. Here's the last rule that will save your middle. Each new obstacle must be bigger than the last. Each scene must raise the stakes, narrow the options, or reveal something the reader didn't know. If your scene is doing none of those three things, cut it or rewrite it. This is the test I want you to run on every chapter in your middle. Are the stakes higher than the last chapter? Are the options fewer? Did the reader learn something they didn't know? If the answer to all three is no, that chapter is not earning its place. Rising action runs roughly from 15% to 50% of your book. In a 300-page novel, that's about 100 pages. 100 pages is a lot of upward pressure to generate, which is why this is where most drafts go to die. Beat 4, the midpoint shift. The middle of your book, around the 50% mark. This is the most underrated book beat in the entire structure. I'm going to come back to it in its own section in a little while, but I want to introduce it here so you see where it sits in the arc. The midpoint shift is where your character moves from reacting to acting, from running from the thing to running toward the thing, from defense to offense, or the reverse if your story arc is a tragedy. Without a clear midpoint shift, your novel will sag. Your reader will get to page 200 of a 400-page book and feel like nothing is changing. They'll start to think, this isn't going anywhere, and they'll put it down. We'll come back to this detail in a few minutes. Beat 5, the climax. Same as Freytag. The moment of greatest tension. The character faces the hardest version of their problem and either wins or loses, or wins by losing, or loses by winning. Climax is not the same as ending. The climax is a scene, sometimes a few scenes. It lands around 80 to 90% through the book. When we get to workshop 7, I'm going to spend an entire hour just on the climax. For now, know two things. One, the climax is built in chapters 1 through 25, not in the climax scene itself. 2, the protagonist has to make the decisive action. Not their sidekick, not a coincidence, not the villain having a change of heart. The protagonist. Beat 6, the resolution. Falling action and the new normal combined. We see the dust settle. We see the character in their changed life. We close the door on this story. Resolution should be short, 20 to 30 pages usually. The reader has just been through the climax. They don't need a long denouement. They need a satisfying exhale. Common mistake. Writers who love their characters give them long, lingering resolutions where everyone gets to say goodbye. The reader's ready to go. Let them go. So that's the 6. Hook, inciting incident, rising action, midpoint shift, climax, resolution. I want you to memorize these. Tape them to your monitor. Put them in your phone notes. Anytime your draft starts to drift, ask yourself which beat you're in and which beat is coming next. 9 times out of 10, that question alone will tell you what the next scene needs to do. Here's the exercise I want to leave with you before we move on. Pick a novel you love, just one. Hold it in your head. Now ask yourself this: what's the hook? Can you say it in one sentence? Now the inciting incident. What's the moment the door opens? Now the midpoint. What changes at the middle of the book? Now the climax. What's the choice the protagonist makes at the highest moment? Now the resolution. What's the new normal at the end? If you can answer all 5 for a novel you love, you know that novel structure. If you can do that for your own book, you have its skeleton. If you can't, that's the work in front of you. If you've read any screenwriting books, you've heard about 3-act structure: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Setup, confrontation, resolution. 25%, 50%, 25%. 3-act structure is the same skeleton viewed from a different angle. Here's how the 6 beats map to the 3 beats. Act 1 is your hook and your inciting incident, the first quarter of the book. By the end of Act 1, the door has opened and the character has stepped through. They can't go home. The end of Act 1 is sometimes called the first plot point or the first turning point. It's the moment that locks the protagonist into the story. Before that moment, they could still walk away. After that moment, the story has them. Act 2 is the bulk of your rising action, your midpoint shift, and the second half of your rising action, 50% of the book. This is the part most writers find terrifying because it's a wide open middle. We just spent 25 minutes giving you a map for it. Act 2 has its own internal turn, the midpoint. So Act 2 splits into Act 2A and Act 2B with the midpoint as the hinge. That's why I love the 6-beat structure over a pure 3-act. 3 acts give you a beginning, middle, and end. 6 beats give you a beginning, 2 middles, and an end. 2 middles is much easier to write than 1 middle because each one has its own engine. Act 3 is your climax and your resolution, the final quarter. From the moment the protagonist commits to the final confrontation all the way through the new normal. The end of Act 2, sometimes called the second plot point, is usually the all is lost moment. The protagonist has tried everything and failed. Now Act 3 begins with them either giving up or finding a new way forward. A word about the percentages. Don't worship them. They're guidelines. Some books have a 30% Act 1 and a 20% Act 3. Some have a midpoint that's actually a 48%. The percentages are not a prison. They're a sanity check. If your inciting incident is at 50%, something's wrong. If your climax is at the halfway mark, something is wrong. Use the percentages to catch big drift, not to police small variations. Different genres have different percentages too. Romance has its own beat structure: the meet, the falling, the dark moment, the grand gesture. Thriller has a faster Act 1 because the reader expects to be hooked immediately. Literary fiction often runs a longer Act 1 because the interiority is the point. Know your genre. Know its conventions. Then break them on purpose, not by accident. Now let's talk about the part of the book where most novels go to die. Middle. The middle of a novel sags for one reason. The writer has run out of new pressure to put on the character. They're writing scenes, but the scenes don't feel like they're moving toward anything. The reader feels it. The writer feels it. The book stalls. I want to be very specific about what this feels like, because if you're going to fix it, you have to recognize it. A sagging middle feels like this. The character's in a situation. The situation has consequences. The character is dealing with the consequences. They have setbacks. They have small victories. They have conversations. They have realizations. But somehow, when you look at the chapter you wrote last week and the chapter you wrote yesterday, the character is in basically the same emotional position. The plot moved forward an inch. The character is still standing in the same spot. That's the sag. The fix is the midpoint shift, and it's one of the most powerful tools you have. There are two main ways to use the midpoint. Three if you want to get sophisticated. Let's walk through them. Way one, the false victory. The character thinks they've won. They got the job. They got the girl. They found the killer. They escaped the country. The reader senses it's too easy, and it is. The false victory cracks, and the real problem walks in the door. The girl turns out to be working with the villain. The job is a setup. The killer turns out to have been the wrong person. The escape was anticipated. Now they're trapped somewhere worse. The false victory is the move you see most often in commercial fiction and film. It's clean. It's satisfying. The reader feels the rug pulled out at the moment when they let their guard down. Way two, the point of no return. The character makes a choice that locks them in. Up to now, they could have turned back. Now they can't. The stakes just doubled. In a romance, the point of no return is often the night the two leads finally admit how they feel. They've been resisting. Now they're committed. The second half is about whether they can survive what comes for them. In a thriller, the point of no return is often the discovery that the enemy is someone the protagonist trusted. Up to now, they were chasing a shadow. Now they know the face. The pursuit changes shape. In a coming-of-age story, the point of no return is often the moment the protagonist breaks from their old self. They take an action they would never have taken on page one. There's no going back to who they were. Both versions, false victory and point of no return, do the same thing. They reset the energy of the book. After the midpoint, the character is no longer reacting to events. They're acting on them. The pursuit becomes active. If you want a third option, here it is, the revelation. The character learns something at the midpoint that changes everything they thought they knew. Not just a plot twist, a meaning twist. The thing they've been doing for the first half of the book now means something different than they thought. The detective who has been hunting the killer learns the killer is her brother. The widow who has been mourning her husband learns he was about to leave her. The young soldier who's been fighting for his country learns the war is a lie. The revelation midpoint doesn't change the action. It changes the meaning of the action. Everything the character does in the second half is colored by this knowledge. Revelations are common in literary fiction and mystery. They require more setup than false victory or point of no return, because the revelation has to land with weight, which means the reader has to be deeply invested in the version of reality that's about to be overturned. If your middle is sagging, do this. Find your 50th percent mark, right in the middle. Ask one question. Is the character on the same trajectory they were at the 25% mark? If yes, you have no midpoint shift. That's why the book is dying. Don't panic. Don't throw out the manuscript. Find the moment in the existing middle that could become the shift. The moment where, with a small rewrite, the character chooses to act instead of react. Or the moment where a small revelation could change the meaning of everything that follows. Or the moment where a false victory could turn sour. Build the midpoint there. Watch the second half come alive. One more piece of the structure puzzle, and then we get to common mistakes in the exercise. Inside the larger arc, every scene is built on a smaller pattern, the try-fail cycle. The character wants something in the scene. They try to get it. They either succeed or fail. If they succeed, the success creates a new problem. If they fail, the failure forces a harder try in the next scene. A common rhythm in novels is this. try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, try, succeed, but at a cost. Then the cost becomes the next problem. If your scenes don't have a try and fail or a try and a costly success, your reader will feel the book go flat, even if the structure is otherwise solid. Here's a pair of words that will keep your scenes from going flat. Yes, but. No, and. When the character tries something, the answer is never a clean yes or a clean no. Yes, but. Did the character get what they wanted? Yes, but now something worse is happening. No, and. Did the character get what they wanted? No, and now things are even harder. If your scene ends with a clean yes, you've closed the loop. The reader has no reason to turn the page. If your scene ends with a clean no, the same problem. Make it yes, but, or no, and the next chapter writes itself. Here's a test. At the end of every chapter, ask yourself this question. What is the reader most desperate to know now that they weren't desperate to know 2 pages ago? If you can't answer that question, your chapter doesn't end, it just stops. Add the question. Earn the page turn. What is the reader most desperate to know now that they weren't desperate to know 2 pages ago? Good chapter endings raise the question. They don't answer it. They put a new fishhook in the reader and drag it forward into the next chapter. There's one more rhythm I want to mention because it shows up in almost every solid novel, even if the writer doesn't name it. Scenes and sequels. A scene is an action sequence. The character has a goal, encounters an obstacle, and either succeeds or fails. Action, decision, consequence. A sequel is what happens between scenes. The character processes what just happened. They feel, they think, they decide what to do next. The mistake new writers make is writing scene after scene without sequels. Action after action. No breath. The reader gets tired. The opposite mistake is writing a sequel after sequel without scenes. Page after page of feeling and thinking and remembering with no action between. The reader gets bored. Alternate. Scene, sequel, scene, sequel. The breath of the book. Before I let you loose for the exercise, I want to name the 5 structural mistakes I see in nearly every new writer manuscript. If you recognize one of these in your own draft, you have your fix. 1. The slow start. Act 1 runs 40% of the book. The writer is in love with their setup. They spend chapter after chapter introducing the world, the family, the secondary characters. By the time the inciting incident hits, the reader's gone. The fix for that is move the inciting incident earlier. Cut the setup material that isn't earning its place. The reader can pick up world details as the story goes. 2. The deflated middle. No midpoint shift. We've talked about this. The character's on the same trajectory in chapter 20 that they were on in chapter 8. The book sags. The fix, find the midpoint, build it on purpose. We talked about how. 3, the rushed climax. The whole book builds and builds, and then the climax is over in 3 pages. The writer was tired. They got to the climax, didn't know how to make it big enough, and wrote it small. The fix for that is the climax deserves a chapter at minimum, sometimes 2 or 3. The book's been pointing at this moment for 300 pages. Don't shortchange it. 4, the endless resolution, the opposite problem. The climax happens, and then the book keeps going for 100 more pages. The writer doesn't want to let go. They give every character their final scene. They tie every thread. They walk the reader through every consequence. The fix for that is cut the resolution down. 20 to 30 pages usually. The reader's ready to go. 5, the hidden second protagonist. The book has been about one character, but somewhere in the middle, a second character takes over. This is sneakier than it sounds. The writer falls in love with a supporting character. They give that character more and more page time. By the climax, the supporting character is making the decisive choice, not the protagonist. The fix for that is pick. If the supporting character has taken over, maybe they should have been the protagonist all along. Restructure the book around them or pull them back and give the protagonist their book back. Run these 5 against your draft. Most novels have one of these. Some have 2. Knowing which one is yours will tell you exactly what to fix. All right, it's exercise time. 10 minutes, real work. Pick a novel, yours if you have a draft in process, or a novel you've read recently, not a movie, a novel. On a piece of paper, write the 6 beats down the left side: hook, inciting incident, rising action, midpoint shift, climax, resolution. Beside each beat, write one sentence, just one. What happens at this beat in your book? When you're done, look at your list. Which beat was easiest to fill in? Which one was hardest? The hardest one is the weakest beat in your book. That's the one that needs work. If you can do this in less than 10 minutes, do one more thing. Write a single sentence describing how you would strengthen that weakest beat. Not a chapter, not a scene, just the structural move. And one more, if you have time, run the 5 common mistakes I just listed against your draft. Which one applies? If 2 apply, which is bigger? Let's start the timer. Welcome back. Before you go, one last thing. I started this hour by telling you about my first novel that died. It died because I didn't have the bones. I had scenes I loved, I had characters I cared about, I had a world that was alive in my head. What I didn't have was the skeleton that holds all those things together. If you have the skeleton, you can write almost any draft to the end because you always know what the next scene has to do. You always know what beat you're approaching. You always know what the chapter you're writing has to set up. If you don't have the skeleton, you can have all the gifts in the world, voice, character, world, prose, and your draft will still die in the middle. This is the unfair part of being a writer. The skeleton's invisible. The reader doesn't see it. They don't admire it. They don't quote it on Goodreads. They just feel the difference between a book that holds them and a book that loses them. Your job is to do the invisible work, to build the bones first, to trust that the reader will feel them even when they can't see them. Structure is permission. It's the railing on the bridge. The writer who knows the bones can break the rules. The writer who doesn't know the bones will be broken by them. So go build your skeleton. Start where you are. If you have a draft, do the audit. If you have an outline, run the 6 beats. If you have just an idea, write the beats first and then start writing the scenes. Next workshop, we'll build the character who has to carry all of this, the protagonist, the person whose change drives the story. Until then, write your beats. I'll see you there.